Hello, I'm Andrew Nairn, Director of Kettle's Yard. I'm delighted to welcome you to this special online event for the launch of our exhibition, Untitled, Art on the Conditions of Our Time, which includes work by 11 outstanding artists. It's a new version of the Untitled exhibition that was originally produced by New Art Exchange in Nottingham in 2017, curated by Paul Goodwin and Hansi Momodou Gordon. This new exhibition at Kettle's Yard is curated by Paul Goodwin, who we'll hear from later, with Guy Hayward, who's assistant curator here at Kettle's Yard. We'd like to thank, of course, Paul and all of the artists who have been absolutely terrific in the most extraordinary circumstances. Of course, like so many others, this exhibition was meant to be more than a year ago, but I can say it's worth the wait. Please come to Cambridge, come to Kettle's Yard and see the exhibition. We'd also like to thank New Art Exchange, who have been fantastic, Arts Council England for their support, and all those who have generously lent to the exhibition. Shortly, we will be in the Kettle's Yard house, where a new performance by Barby Asante is about to start, called To Make Love is to Create Ourselves Over and Over Again, a love poem for Audre. The new performance relates to an ambitious sound of video work by Barby Asante has made for the show, which takes its inspiration from Black feminist writer Audre Lorde, her important essay from 1977, Poetry is Not a Luxury. This evening's event is one of a number of online events and videos that accompanies the exhibition, so keep an eye on our website and social media channels and join us online in September for a panel discussion where Paul Goodwin will be joined by some of the artists in the exhibition to discuss their work and some of the themes of the show. We will now join Barby Asante and her collaborators in the Kettle's Yard house. The performance will last around 50 minutes. It will be followed by a short introduction to the exhibition by Paul Goodwin. We will then rejoin Barby Asante, who will be in conversation with the writer Lola Olufemi. Special thanks to Barbie, Paul, Lola, and everyone who's contributed to this evening's event. Thank you for coming. Do please come and see the exhibition as well. Thank you.
To make love is to recreate ourselves over and over again. A love poem to Audre Lorde, based on her 1977 piece for Chrysalis, a magazine of female culture. Poetry is not a luxury. Thank you to Sarah Ray for opening the space, to Sarah Shin and Silver Press for the permissions to make the piece from this reading of Audre Lorde's piece. I am Barby Asante, and I'm reading here today with Feluke Taylor, Nadia Swaby. Our sound design and soundscape for this work is provided here by Hannah Catherine Jones and Femi Oriogun-Williams. Poetry is not a luxury. Poetry is not a luxury.
By Audre Lorde.
By Audre Lorde.
The quality of light by which we scrutinize our lives has direct bearing upon the product which we live and upon the changes which we hope to bring about through these lives. It is within this light that we form those ideas by which we pursue our magic and make it realized. This is poetry as illumination. For it is through poetry that we give name to those ideas which are, until the poem, nameless and formless, about to be birthed, but already felt. That distillation of experience from which true poetry springs, births thought, as dream births concept, as feelings births ideas, as knowledge births, precedes understanding.
As we learn to bear the intimacy of scrutiny and to flourish within it, as we learn to use the products of that scrutiny for power within our living, those fears which rule our lives and form our silences begin to lose their control over us.
For each of us as women, there is a dark place within where hidden and growing our true spirit rises. Beautiful and tough as chestnut stanchions against your nightmare of weakness and of impotence. These places of possibility within ourselves are dark because they are ancient and hidden. They have survived and grown strong through that darkness. And within these deep places, each one of us holds an incredible reserve of creativity and power, of unexamined and unrecorded emotion and feeling. The woman's place of power within each of us is neither white nor surface. It is dark, it is ancient, and it is deep.
When we view living in the European mode only as a problem solved, we rely solely upon our ideas to make us free. For these were what the white fathers told us were precious. But as we come more into touch with our own ancient, non-European consciousness of living as a situation to be experienced and interacted with, we learn more and more to cherish our feelings and to respect those hidden sources of our power from where true knowledge and therefore lasting action comes.
At this point in time, I believe that women carry within ourselves the possibility for fusion of these two approaches so necessary for survival, and we come closest to this combination in our poetry. I speak here of poetry as revelatory distillation of experience, not the sterile wordplay that too often the white fathers distorted the word poetry to mean in order to cover a desperate wish for imagination without insight. As we come into touch with our own ancient and hidden sources of power, from where true knowledge and therefore lasting action comes. As we come to touch, the ache was so strong today. What is the source of the ache? It felt like it was in my hip, but when I touched my hip, I knew it was deeper. I tried to move my hips, first gentle undulations, slowly to the right, to the left, hands on my hips, trying to release the deep ache that I could not reach, shaking my hips with more force, shaking, trying to force the shake, trying to find the ache buried in my body. I shook every part of my body in a deep, rigorous undulation, shaking, until I was no longer in my living room. I was inside my body, within the bounds of my pelvis, touching the nerves, examining the curves of my body, entering into the deep muscle tissue, looking for the ache. I found nothing. It was not there. I thought it was. So I climbed up my spine, vertebrae by vertebrae, through my rib cage, past my intestines, my liver, my kidney, past the lungs to my heart. I entered my heart through my pulmonary vein into my left ventricle. The darkness warming and embracing my body. And when I reached inside, I was surrounded by an expansive vessel. A gush of blood covered me from head to toe, and an ancient drumbeat sounded in my ear. The blood warmed me with its silky wetness, the drumbeat speaking the words of ancestors connected through blood and heartbeats. Although I was inside, I could not find the ache. And I knew that this journey might not yield the information I need. This ache has lived in me for so long. I need to find it. I climbed out of my hurt, up to my neck, into a vertebrae, examining nerves and bones, shoulder blades, my neck, until I expelled myself out of my mouth, finding myself standing there, still shaking my body, vigorously shaking my body, shaking, 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 until tears fell from my eyes. So many tears, wet, salty, uncontrollable tears. Tears from ancient and dusty rivers. Tears from oceans left behind, tears from the bottom of the sea, tears for my mother, for my father, for my grandmothers and grandfathers, tears for ancient genderless ancestors, tears for my future children. I was surrounded by the water of my tears. So many tears. So much water. Submerged by water, all I can do is float. Strangely refreshing, strangely revealing. While floating in the water of my tears, I touch my body to see if I can feel the source of my ache. The ache.
Poetry is not a luxury. It is a vital necessity of our existence. It forms the quality of light within which we predicate our hopes and dreams towards survival and change, first made into language, then into idea, then into more tangible action. Poetry is the way we give help and name to the nameless so it can be thought. The farthest horizons of our hopes and fears are cobbled by our poems, carved from the rock experiences of our daily lives.
As they become known to us and accepted by us, our feelings and the honest exploration of them become sanctuaries and spawning grounds for the most radical and daring of ideas. They become a safe house for that difference so necessary to change and the conceptualization of any meaningful action. Right now, I could name at least 10 ideas I would have found intolerable or incomprehensible and frightening, except as they came after dreams and poems. This is not idle fantasy, but a disciplined attention to the true meaning of "it feels right to me."
It feels right to me.
We can train ourselves to respect our feelings and to transpose them into a language so they can be shared. And where that language does not yet exist, it is our poetry which helps to fashion it. Poetry is not only dream and vision,
Dream, not only
it
dream.
is the skeleton architecture of our lives. It lays the foundations for a future of change, a bridge across our fears of what has never been before.
Possibility is neither forever nor instant. It is not easy to sustain belief in its efficacy. We can sometimes work long and hard to establish one beachhead of real resistance to the deaths we are expected to live, only to have that beachhead assaulted or threatened by those canards we have been socialized to fear, or by the withdrawal of those approvals that we have been warned to seek for safety. Women see ourselves diminished or softened by the falsely benign accusations of childishness, of non-universality, of changeability, of sensuality. And who asks the question? Am I altering your aura, your ideas, your dreams, or am I merely moving you to temporary and reactive action? And even though the latter is no mean task, it is one that must be seen within the context of a need for true alteration of the very foundation of our lives.
The white fathers told us, "I think, therefore I am." The black mother within each of us, the poet, whispers in our dreams, "I feel, therefore I can be free."
Therefore, I can be free.
Poetry coins the language to express and charter this revolutionary demand, the implementation of that freedom. This is a poetic meditation drawn from the archive of our past, present, and future lives, written in the spirit of Audre Lorde and in communion with the ancestors, Ashe.
Ashe.
It is a poetic meditation inspired by that distillation of experiences from which poetry births thought, dream births concept, and feeling births idea. That quality of light through which we scrutinize our lives, from which knowledge births and precedes understanding. This is a poetic meditation about ways of knowing that can't be taught, but are nevertheless deeply felt, shared, and experienced. It is written in the spirit of Audre Lorde, drawn from the archive of our past, present, and future lives, and in communion with the ancestors. Ashe.
Ashe.
Awaken your inner knowing, that inherent knowing, that embodied certainty that you can't explain. Know that you refuse to explain because you know that what you feel is true. At least true for you, and sometimes in that inner knowing, that's all that really matters, that trust in yourself, that pure faith in you. Audre says that we can train ourselves to trust those feelings, those ways of knowing, that embodied certainty that you can't explain. That refusal to explain your inner knowing that what you feel is true. True for you, my friend, true for Audre, and true for me too. And sometimes that's all that really matters, that trust in yourself, that pure faith in you. I know because I'm learning to trust my inner knowing too. And if we together can train ourselves to trust those feelings, those inner ways of knowing, that embodied certainty that we refuse to explain, that feeling we always already know to be true. And if we together can train ourselves to trust those feelings and transpose them into a language that can be shared through our poetry, a poetry that is based not on words and thoughts, but on that inner knowing, that skeleton architecture of our lives that inspires our dreams and visions and lays the foundations for a future of change. Perhaps then our feelings do survive. Awaken your inner knowing, that embodied certainty and refusal to explain because you know that what you feel is true. True for Audre and true for me too. Audre said, I feel, therefore I know I can be free. And I think of the ancestors, the ones who weren't free, yet experienced the feeling of freedom in their freedom dreams. They found freedom in their inner knowing, that embodied certainty in their humanity that they always already knew to be true. They found freedom in their inner knowing and in their hopes for survival and change. They turned those feelings and inner ways of knowing into a shared language, shared ideas, and tangible actions. I think of the ancestors, the ones who weren't free, yet experienced the feeling of freedom in their freedom dreams. And I know that poetry as dreams and visions can be our liberation. Awaken your inner knowing, that embodied certainty and refusal to explain, because you know that what you feel is true for you, true for Audre, true for the ancestors, and true for me too. Audre said, I feel, therefore I can be free. We say, we feel, therefore we know we are always already free.
We feel, therefore we know we are.
That feels like the true meaning of it feels right to me.
It feels right to me. However, experience has taught us that action in the now is also necessary. Always. Always. Our children cannot dream unless they live. They cannot live unless they are nourished. And who else will feed them the real food without which their dreams will be no different from ours? They say, if you want us to change the world someday, we at least have to live long enough to grow up, shouts the child.
Scrutiny. Walking through the park. Bopping more than walking because the weekend, because the sun, because on my way to Brixton Market, two women sat on a bench, one at either end, leaning back, arms spread wide, legs akimbo, watching. Talking to each other, but watching me. Their eyes breeze on mine, drag from my head top down to my shoe, follow all the curves and lines of me in between. That's what you might call scrutiny. And scrutiny from outside triggers scrutiny from within, and suddenly self-consciousness disrupts my stride, my step, the swing of my arms, and the more aware I am of their gaze, the more offbeat I feel. Scrutiny uncouples my body from its groove, jogs the needle on my 45, brings every warp and scratch up to the surface where surely now everyone can see. Scrutiny, sometimes I can hardly bear it. And then I learned that the word is Latin from scruta, meaning rubbish. Scrutiny, literally, to sort rubbish. I think, of course. Rubbish puts me in mind of the people who appeared in the late afternoons across the highway from where I used to teach, who came for the rubbish, wandered the ever-smoldering landscape, climbed trash mountains, excavated with jelly-sandaled feet, and children, armed with sticks, split stinking bags, spread the guts of them, turned every hill and gully to a divining ground for scrutiny, for telling the future, for treasure seeking, treasure being something you need, have need for, can make use of, like the powdered milk tin that becomes a scoop for rice, like the blue plastic bag dust danced by the wind, waiting in dirt and disgrace to be taken home, washed and dried, sliced and woven into a child's braids for the holy days. On our side of the highway, we try not to get too intimate with the entanglement of rubbish and air permeating our membranes, making the place smell bad. And as we pass under the mango trees to enter the college, we press our wrappers, our palms, arms, notebooks up against our noses, and we screw our faces and hold our breath. And I teach ethics, encourage students to develop a critical eye, what to look for, how to look, and how to discern what you are looking at. What are you looking at? A question of scrutiny, but also sometimes a war maneuver, an invitation to get into it, like what you're looking at. What are you looking at? A certain tone, scrutiny turned back on you, and you have to decide to stand your ground or run for your life, to play shy or dare to reply, fright, flight, fight, your choice. This is the screw face conundrum. What you're looking at, inferring that you should look away and that your scrutiny is not welcome. And that looking at people like rubbish to be sorted is always going to be a risky game. And ultimately, don't watch me. Don't watch me. Don't watch me is what I do not say to the women on the bench, because I'm not made for that kind of fight, but also, and more to the point, what in me is so afraid to be seen? We all smell like rubbish sometimes, why wouldn't we? None of us escape the stench of stratified humanity, of a rubbishing world that hates, throws away, extracts, exacts, condemns us to this anxious churn and spiraling worry about smart enough, sex enough, paid enough, self-made enough, grown enough, owner enough, independent enough, on top enough, loved enough, and deep down, will I ever be enough? Enough.
Yes!
Enough.
Never enough.
Yes.
That type of scrutiny that fears everything and sees nothing, not useful. Not Audre's invitation, not for us, and not for my sisters on the bench, not for me to accuse them. How is it that I think I know what it is they see when they look at me? They are not the critics here, not the ones criticizing, talking about not walking straight, talking about smelling like rubbish. I am the one. I am the one who knows what I know. I know that I am not enough, and that in my not enoughness, I am enough. I know that I am here to remind myself, and you, if you need to hear, to look kindly as you look, to look kindly as you are looked at. We are here to remember that scrutiny is not unlove, but the kind of looking that doesn't mistake mess for rubbish, and the kind of knowing that sees there is always something, some treasure to sort for. Scrutiny is eyes that care, that can, among the rubbish and thrown away, make time to see what needs to be reclaimed. The parts of us waiting to be brought home, washed and woven, plaited into our hair for the holy days. On days like this, we claim ourselves enough. Enough. We name ourselves worth reaching for, worth every journey into the dark. On days like this, we come together, dare to look at each other. Head top through to shoe, in heart and blood to the bones of our dreams. Come watch us. Come watch me. Watch the way I read, the way I move. Come watch the way I walk. Watch long and hard and kind enough, and you will see the look, the smell of poetry.
Come watch us. Come watch us. Sometimes we drug ourselves with dreams of new ideas. The head will save us. The brain alone will set us free. But there are no new ideas still waiting in the wings to save us as women, as human. There are only old and forgotten ones, new combinations, extrapolations, and recognitions from within ourselves, along with the renewed courage to try them out. And we must constantly encourage ourselves and each other to attempt the heretical actions that our dreams imply. And so many of our old ideas disparage. In the forefront of our mood towards change, there is only poetry to hint at possibility made real. Our poems formulate the implications of ourselves that we feel within and dare to make real or bring action to into accordance with our fears, our hopes, our most cherished terrors.
For within living structures defined by profit, by linear power, by institutional dehumanization, our feelings were not meant to survive. Kept around as unavoidable adjuncts or pleasant pastimes, feelings were expected to kneel to thought, as women were expected to kneel to men. But women have survived as poets, and there are no new pains. We have felt them all already. We have hidden that fact in the same place where we have hidden our power. They surface in our dreams, and it is our dreams that point the way to freedom. Those dreams are made realizable through our poems that give us the strength and courage to see, to feel, to speak, and to dare. If what we need to dream, to move our spirits most deeply and directly toward and through promise, is discounted as a luxury, then we give up the core, the fountain of our power, our womanness. we give up the future of our world.
For there are no new ideas. There are only new ways of making them felt, of examining what those ideas feel like being lived on Sunday morning at 7 a.m.
Sunday morning at 7 a.m.
After brunch, during wild love, making war, giving birth, mourning our dead.
Mourning our dead while we suffer the old longings, battle the old warnings and fears of being silent and impotent and alone, while we taste new possibilities and strengths.
Untitled, Art on the Conditions of Our Time, is an invitation in the form of an exhibition. Untitled invites visitors to experience a range of contemporary artistic practices by artists of African descent in Britain without a predetermined theme or reductive curatorial frame. The term untitled refers to a long-standing practice in art where artists make use of the word untitled to keep interpretations of their work open. In the context of this exhibition, the term is used to resist the common impulse to frame Black and brown artists through the narrow lens of identity or personal biography. This exhibition places the artworks and the creative process at the center of the project, rather than as a supplement to an overarching curatorial statement. Untitled at Kettle's Yard presents a variety of contemporary artistic practices across works of art that speak to the complexity of the times that we live in. This exhibition positions artists and their artworks as agents of our contemporary moment. The statement, Art on the Conditions of Our Time, is an invitation to the public to view these works as creative proposals for investigating some of the key questions and concerns of our present cultural condition. This condition is characterized by growing racial and class inequalities, the growth of populism, nationalism, homophobia, and transphobia worldwide, conflicts over shifting cultural boundaries of gender, sex, and identity, and technologically mediated challenges to the notion of the human. The exhibition was planned and conceived before the start of the global COVID-19 pandemic, but it's clear that these challenges have been exacerbated by the pandemic. The works in the exhibition enable the public to consider some important questions. For example, how can art engage the technological transformation of human and post-human identities through the prism of radical post-colonial ideas? Or how does painting convey the ongoing relevance of history to contemporary life? What are the legacies of African influence on Western modernism? What would it mean in the context of Black queer life to start from a position of abundance rather than scarcity or deficit? What is the status of materials, images, and objects in commodified global popular culture? What are the rituals that we need around love and the everyday? And how are they informed by Black feminist thought? What is the relationship between drawing and freedom? And what is the color of freedom? What happens when we reimagine portraiture through the interrelation of architecture, sound, and movement? And how can sound, gesture, color, timing, and performance in an artwork speak to the urgency of the present moment while mining the spirit of Kettle's Yard and its archives? So these are just some of the many questions posed in the most beautiful, complex, and inspiring ways by the artist in this exhibition. As you wander through the galleries, hopefully you'll see that in many of these questions and concerns overlap across and between artworks expressed over multiple forms of media, encompassing painting and drawing, film, installation, performance, sculpture, and bookmaking. Untitled does not present fixed, definitive answers to these crucial questions. Rather, it invites viewers to contemplate, wrestle with, and draw their own conclusions by engaging directly with the works and their juxtapositions in the gallery space. With a focus on the creative strategies and research on materials from some of the most innovative artists working in Britain today, the work in Untitled marks a radical, bold contribution to the art of our time. First and foremost, I would like to thank all of the artists in the show: Larry Champong and David Blandy, Barby Asante, Apau Junior Boachi Uyedom, Phoebe Boswell, Kimathi Donkor, Evan Ifikoya, Cedar Lewison, Harold Offe, Imo Abasi Okon, and NT, I'd like to thank the artists for their fantastic contributions and all the incredible hard work they've put into this project over quite a few years. I'd also like to thank the brilliant curators and co-conspirators I've worked with on this show for over many years, particularly Hansi Mamadou Gordon, who co-curated the first chapter of Untitled at New Art Exchange in Nottingham, and Guy Hayward, who worked tirelessly with me to curate the Kettle's Art version of Untitled. I'd also like to extend thanks to Skinder Hundal, Melanie Kidd, and Cindy Sissoko from New Art Exchange, and Andrew Nairn, Amy Tobin, and all the installation, education, and outreach teams who've all worked so tirelessly to produce this beautiful version of the exhibition at Kettle's Yard. Thank you, and I look forward to welcoming you all to see the show, and see you all soon. Thank you so much.
Hello, everyone. I'm Lola. I'm a writer and researcher from London. You all just watched a performance entitled "To Make Love is to Create Ourselves Over and Over Again, a Love Poem for Audre" by the incredible Barby Asante, featuring Hannah Catherine Jones, Feluke Taylor, Nadia Swaby, Sia Ray, Femi Oriagun-Williams. This live performance is part of the opening of Kettle's Yard's new exhibition, Untitled, Art and the Conditions of Our Time, curated by Paul Goodwin, who we just heard from. Barby Asante is a London-based artist, curator, educator, and occasional DJ. Her work is concerned with the politics of place, space memory, and the histories and legacies of colonialism. Asante's work is collaborative, performative, and dialogic, often working with groups of people as contributors, collaborators, or co-researchers. Her artistic practice explores the archival, makes propositions, collects and maps stories and contributions of people of color using storytelling, collective actions, and ritual to excavate, unearth, and interrogate given narratives, making works that consider migration, safe spaces to gather in cities antagonistic to one's presence, and how one maps the self as a contributor to narratives of society, culture, and politics. So we're going to chat for 40 minutes until about 7:35, and then we're going to leave 10 to 15 minutes for questions. So for viewers, please send your questions in using the email address that should be below your video. So the email address is program@kettlesyard.cam.ac.uk. So that's program@kettlesyard.cam.ac.uk. Please do send in your questions as we speak, and I will feed them through to Barby. Thank you so much, Barby. That was incredible. So meditative. I guess I wanted to start with what jumped out to me when I was listening to the text again, which is that Lord's poetry is not a luxury, I think helps us expand our conception of what poetry is, what it means. I think it takes it out of the realm of the static and makes it dialogic, much like your work. And I think it also reminds us that how crucial it is to keep kind of dream space alive. So I want to ask you first, for you as an artist, what's the significance of the kind of effective space that you conjure using ritual and dreaming and the conjunction of text and sound? What does that offer for you?
Well, it's funny because I was in the performance. We've done a few today. We've kind of rehearsed and we've done a kind of a couple of run throughs, and I'm like, what's going on here? What is it we're doing? And one of the things that I was thinking about was one of the actions that I do often when I'm working with people, and that is reading together. We read together, and there's a kind of ritual reading together, and of hearing each other's voices and hearing each other kind of expand on the text, and to kind of to sort of bring another level to, like you said, there's words, they sit on a page, but there's also there's a kind of life to them. And I think particularly when I think about sort of Black women's writing, Black and Third women's writing, women of colour writing, a lot of stuff that I'm kind of really interested in. I think that there is you know, a kind of aliveness in the archival, and it feels really appropriate in some way sometimes to be in community, to kind of work with those words, to be in a kind of ritual, to kind of remember where those words come from, particularly since we've lost so many of these sisters along the way, and you know, their words still have resonances. But then also for me, I suppose the kind of connection to sort of thinking about that in relation to ritual is to think about all the things that we've lost, and the things, and then how rituals can ground us, whether they be things that we do every day, or whether they be things that we do, you know, that have ceremony around them, such as the performance that we did today. You know, that those have this kind of like ability to sort of transform space, to reclaim and to recover space, not only within the, you know, kind of, and for me, I'm always doing them in institutional spaces, but not only for that purpose, but also for our own internal, you know, our own internal spaces. So, you know, I started with a piece that kind of was about kind of returning to the inside, returning into the internal body, to kind of, and I've become really interested in that actually. Is like, how do we think about return? I mean, I'm wearing a you know, a Sankofa dress now, and the idea of this return, which I think once upon a time people used to really think in kind of African, Pan-African ideas, that this return was to return back to Africa. But you know, I wonder also about these kind of returns that are actually so much about us being able to connect with each other, with ancestors, but not necessarily, yeah, we can do it through land, but we can also do it through kind of our bodies, and through embodied practices, and through reading words of, you know, of those that came before us, of those words that of people who are evoking people, fictions that, you know, that kind of touch on the archives of our stories, all kinds of things like that. So for me, ritual kind of, and I know it's really different for people, because people often think about it as a very kind of personal and a very kind of sacred, and I do feel that, but I also feel like there is something very much about a community as well, and creating communities, even as they're sort of insular, but also as they kind of ripple outwards, you know? So like this performance is our circle, our semicircle, and then it sort of ripples outwards into your space where you are, Lola, and the other people that are here. And yeah, I hope that kind of answers.
Yeah, it definitely does. And when you were talking, I was also thinking about the kind of long history of public mourning, right? You're talking about community, you're talking about grieving openly, creating spaces where we might be able to like feel in a very unashamed way. I think that's what came out when I was watching the performance, especially that feeling is sometimes paramount. And so I'm interested, and I'm wondering if you could talk a bit more about the use of multivocality in your work. Why many voices instead of one? But also, I think, could you talk maybe a bit about the connection between many voices and a kind of messing up or disruption of chronology, of kind of linear times, of like a very rationalist understanding of how we think about the world? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. I just think many voices make really for powerful, really, you know, stand. And you know, I feel like I've always been in a kind of practice of making work with people, not, you know, because I feel like also if I'm going to sort of, you know, trouble the institution, and I'm troubling also this notion of the kind of you know, virtuosity that comes from one. I don't make my work, even if I was to be a, you know, I'm not making it without influences of others. And I think that there's something that says, that Audre says in Poetry Is Not a Luxury, about this kind of, the way that we connect to others. It's like, it's important to have those kind of relationships. So for me, I've often worked with this idea of multivocality, different voices. Of course, people sort of, I mean, of course, you know, when I was, say I was working with like an elders group, as I did many years ago, they would kind of turn to me to create the kind of container for that. And I think that that's what I do, is I can create a container for that, as I suppose if you would say my individual artistic practice is doing that. But there's something very powerful in that kind of, for me, in that kind of speaking with others. Plus I am a person that really, I think I just think our relationality is, you know, we just don't exist without other people. And to be able to kind of do that, we bring in all of our different registers. Like in this piece, for example, you can really see the different ways in which we were kind of reading with. Now, I have a bit more of a relationship with the work that's in Kettle's Yard, and also the work. So, you know, I bring this piece in that's kind of speaks, I think, a lot to the rituals that are in the different videos that you can see, because I've spent so much time with them, and seeing, you know, how people are kind of like spending time with themselves. And I think I just need to add there that it was interesting to make this work, you know, while most people, you know, to collect the videos from people while most people were in some sort of confinement, you know, and isolation because of COVID. So, you know, it has a kind of extra resonances of these rituals that you're doing, like, I don't know, playing basketball, or, you know, walking, or you know, walking in kind of spaces where there is no one else walking, you know, or it kind of had those sorts of resonances and haunting. But I also don't think that it is, like you said, when you're talking about kind of time and temporalities and the ways in which, I don't think it's isolated to this time, you know. Even as I watch the videos, I don't think it's kind of, you know, it sort of shrinks time, it kind of expands it. There is a kind of, you know, it's captured in a moment, but, you know, there's a recognition. Yeah, there's so many sort of layers. Am I answering where you're going? I was just sort of thinking, am I going off piste a little bit? I probably am. That's okay. But yeah, you kind of come in if there was something that I'm not kind of.
So I think basically you touched on something that I think is really important in not only the performance that we just watched, but your pieces for the exhibition. Is this idea that, like, creating an effective space, creating a place where people are able to feel in different registers or are being moved, enables you to kind of like scatter what we're told time looks like, or what we're told history should look like, or what we're told kind of grieving or mourning should look like. And I think that that's politically useful, right? You're being asked to respond to the condition of our time. And I would say the condition of our time is very much a kind of like neoliberal rigidity that wants to fix us into specific places, identities, you know, structures. And what I got from that performance was fluidity. And I would love for you to talk about also the importance of improvisation, because I think in any project for liberation, improvisation is crucial, you know, and attentiveness to spontaneity is an important. And
that's what is also really clear in that kind of, in the poetics of the piece, right? Is that, you know, we need the space to dream. The improvisation allows us the space to dream. We have these like rigid, you know, structures in which we, you know, kind of form ourselves. And this is why, in a lot of ways, I choose, when I've made sort of works and groups, I often choose to not be in the gallery. I kind of take myself outside of the space, or if I do, I scatter the work, because, you know, it's an opportunity for a viewer to kind of like not feel like to have their kind of perception messed up, right? So that they're not kind of really fixed in this kind of like, well, this is where the work is, and this is where the, you know, and that I can follow this, and this work is always fragmented, and you might not see all of it, and you might not hear all of it, and you know what, that's okay, because I'm not trying to kind of place this thing in front of you in that way, because, and in a sense, I'm trying to capture a bit of, you know, particularly this piece is like, that is, you know, this kind of Black women's lives, and you kind of don't see us. And I'm not doing that to sort of make us invisible. I'm doing that to kind of like disrupt this space that is kind of very much saying, this is how it is. This is the, you know, and then there's this gallery, and, you know, I don't know if we necessarily sit so comfortable in it. And there's a line in there with, when in the piece where she talks about the kind of when the canards come at you, you know, and you know, the things that you're supposed to want, and I want to question that thing that was supposed to want, like that question, that kind of like, I'm supposed to want this thing. I mean, the first time I did one of those kind of like fractured installations, yeah, I wanted to go to Venice and stuff, but at the same time I wanted to disrupt that. I knew that there was a disruption in me that was like, well, I'd like to keep this place as a domestic space, and I'd like to kind of explore this space with the voices of the women that I had collected, you know, where they were telling their stories within the spaces of the palazzo in the Diaspora Pavilion, and you know, they were not necessarily so visible, or so kind of, you couldn't just stand there and listen to a whole narrative. And so I'm kind of interested in that, how that sort of disrupts the space, particularly a space that asks, like a gallery space that is so predicated on this revealing, this knowing, this kind of way of knowing, you know. So yeah, so that's one thing that I kind of think. And there's something about just kind of going, I don't know if I'm kind of still in the same territory. It's very, I feel like I've just come out of the performance, and there's loads of, but there's something about, I was thinking about kind of the layering of time, something that I'm really interested in. And one of the pieces that I did, you know, when we were kind of confined last year, was to do a reading of Nobise Phillips' Caravana on the August bank holiday. So Caravana, for people who don't know, is a piece that Nobise Philip has wrote about the carnival in Canada, in Toronto. But it just felt so right at the time that I just really wanted to read with people. And so I read with Folu K. Taylor and Gail Lewis, Paul Goodwin, Anthony Joseph, and Rambise Marufu. We read Caravana as almost as a way of like remembering the time that we could get onto the street and disrupt the street, you know, when carnival happens. And actually the beautiful thing about Caravana is it goes across time. So it travels across time, and it remembers us all as, you know, people who take to the street as Tota Benz and Maisie's, as present in everybody, that, you know, every Black body that takes to the street at that time, you know, at carnival, everywhere, in Trinidad, in, you know, in Dakar, or in Toronto, or in Brooklyn. So it kind of connects us all, and the histories and all of the kind of things that we need to remember, or we remember in order to, to find the ground. Yeah, I think I am slightly off base.
I think that makes me think about how temporal regimes kind of encroach on one another, so that the past, present, and future are not these like distinct things that we come to, right? They always linger in one another in certain ways. And it makes me think about the link in your work, the ways that you're thinking about ancestry, and the ways that you're thinking about, a mythology of a people, and what does it mean to kind of like remember and grieve actively instead of doing those things in a kind of passive way. Could you speak a bit more about your relationship to ancestry and Sankofa, and just in the work that you do in general? Because that was something that came out in the performance as well. There's a kind of strong link for your viewers to understand that you are situating yourself in a legacy, and you're acknowledging the kind of echoes and the fractures of these temporal regimes that we're thought to think of as completely separate.
Yeah, I think for me it's become a kind of way of thinking about the absence of the archive, and actually also thinking about the absence in and absence of our archives, as in Black folks' archives, and particularly Black women. And so how then we kind of are in dialogue with them, with that, and and with that knowing. Or how do you know when there are no records? How do you know? I love how Toni Morrison speaks about the fragments that she would work with to create a newspaper clipping or a photograph for Sula, or the newspaper clipping for Beloved, and and then imagine the interior life, and then she would do so much detail in that interior life. You would just kind of completely understand why the character moves one cup from here to there. It's just that to give life to something that is no longer living, and we have practices of kind of African peoples have always had practices of relating to their ancestors. I mean, last week I spent my time in I was filming in Glasgow, and we're filming in kind of museums and museum collections, and seeing objects, and there's like these like heads and different things, and there's a thing I know exactly. Because a friend of mine in New Zealand has done some work. New Zealand from Atua has done this work around repatriating some of these objects, and like their significance, they hold ancestors, they were made because of this, for this specificity, but yet we kind of they're sort of dispersed, and so many of our ancestors dispersed. I can meet you, you could be from the Caribbean, we could be related, we don't know this, but this sort of maybe the only way to kind of connect with that is through trying to remember. And I'm not so sort of specific in this way. Saya, who is in the piece as well, I've done some like shamanic work with Saya, done journeying, and I remember being in a conversation with her about journeying and saying, so I met an ancestor, but the ancestor didn't look like my grandfather. I know that this is and I think this kind of wonderful explanation that she gave was, well, what was it? It was like, well, that they don't always look like your grandparents, like they're ancestors that you don't know, and when you kind of sort of tap into spaces, there's knowings that you didn't know. It's a bit like how Toni Morrison describes in Beloved Rememory, like you go to a place and you're touching on a memory, you don't necessarily know it's something that is there, and is touching you and maybe even telling your whole story, but you don't know that it might not even belong to you, you know, but it's connected to you because it wants to tell you its story. And that might sound really quite mad to people, but you know, I think there's something really powerful for us in needing to find that ground. You know, like white folks are really like, yeah, you know, like this, whatever, you know, all these programs, all this thing, all this rubbish DNA thing that kind of tells you, like, you know, you've got 1% Native American or kind of whatever. And often these things are kind of blatantly exclusive of us, you know, and so we have to find ways back. So when I'm thinking a lot about the ways in which Sankofa has been thought of previously as this kind of return to Africa, well, the kind of meaning say it is not taboo to return to one's past. It's, you know, get up and go and get it. Like the bird is looking backwards in order to kind of reflect, I think, but also to nurture a future. So I think it's kind of a bit more complex. And, you know, I don't know everything about these things. I'm on a journey of exploration as to really rethink the ways in which we think about memory and you know, and the ways that we practice memory and where memory resides, and also to think about it kind of in a way like ethically. Is it kind of ethical for us to keep continuing to collect and accumulate and to have this access, and then to also only have it as particular kinds of document on, you know, particular kinds of things, or, you know, this document is more valuable than this document, and that document is more valuable than my voice or my story. So yeah, I'm just kind of making that kind of exploration.
Thank you so much for that. Also, when you were talking and you were talking about memory, I was thinking memory, what your work proves so much is, I think, is that memory, for some of us at least, resides in the body, right? Like memory is narrativized via the archive in official state documents, but all of those histories, all of those stories that don't make it into the official archive or are purposefully excluded, for all of us who, you know, don't even appear as minor characters in the history of a certain place, like those are kind of slippery and watery histories, right? And so where else, they can't reside in like the kind of prism of like rationality, whatever. So they reside in the body, they're embodied, and we're able in ways maybe to tap into them in certain kind of spaces that we build, and in certain ways of knowing that we project and stuff like that. I was thinking also just about kind of Black feminist love ethics, and when I was watching the performance specifically about Jennifer Nash, and that thing that she says that about a Black feminist love ethic, which is like, rather than looking, you know, to the state or to institutions for redress, a Black feminist love ethic looks towards each other, right? Holds relation as key, holds relation as paramount. And so I wanted to ask, in the fact that your work is, you know, so collaborative, what's your conceptualization of love in your work, and how do you think it shapes how you understand community and how you understand, I guess, the work that you're making?
You know, I said many years ago when I was working with Sorry to Feel Uncomfortable, we did a lot of reading of just one bit of the Undercommons, which is the politics surrounded. And there is a line in the end that says, we owe each other the indeterminate, we owe each other everything. And it just felt so just like, whoa, wow. Every time I just kind of think about that kind of phrase. And I started recently sort of reading that with students, but reading it through another chapter in the Undercommons, which is the chapter on debt and study. And again, thinking about this kind of the way that they speak about, actually I first read it with Gail Lewis and Felipe Taylor, actually, and it was and the way they think about, you know, there's the debt that is related to study, which is like never being able to be paid back, and actually that you know, the places in which we study or really have our learning are kind of outside of this kind of accreditation, kind of indebted way of being. And actually, you know, that really relates very much to kind of ways in which we kind of are there for each other. And I think very much in Black feminist kind of circles, or in fact, you know, in some of the ways in which I've wanted to kind of develop my work, is to think about the ways in which we are, you know, indebted to each other, but in a kind of that beautiful debt which is never going to be paid back, and we know it's never going to be paid back. And you know, it's just this cycle of indebtedness and love and care that we have for ourselves and each other, and that so I mean, I try to bring that as much as possible into the work, whether it is through the way that I'm making it or the ways in which the communities are built around that. So very much more recently, I've been working probably more and more with the same people, and those people do span the world, actually, you know, from like people that I will kind of connect with in Australia to Amsterdam, to you know, to here, to the north of England, or whatever. That's how, you know, I'm thinking about that. So that kind of, and that is the circle of indebtedness, which actually also repeats itself when, you know, some like Hannah Bial calls me and says, you know, my festival that I do in the north, I would like to do this. And, you know, we think about how we sort of reciprocate and you know, and grow things. So I like this idea of these, like, you know, these little emergent ripples that kind of come outwards, and that we're all kind of you know, supporting and creating each other. And in a way, when you think about all this kind of individual work, like, you know, Lola and I, you know, doing PhDs or whatever, that we can actually also do those works, even though they're going to accredit us individually, in community, you know, in community, whether that's through kind of creating ways in which we meet and write together, or we meet and talk about our work, or read together, or, you know, all those things that are not seen as being so, you know, because we're so sort of supposed to be so individual, and are things that I think that start to bring about, that I'm starting to think about. But also, I suppose the other things that I would add to that is also, you know, I think I probably do that through and I would say mothering or parenting. I have to mention that it's my child's birthday today, or my adult child's birthday today. But what I think I learned through parenting and parenting in community is, you know, I was very fortunate to parent in community. So we're like sharing the kids, you know, it was a village. It was we brought in, when most of us were Ghanaian or had some Ghanaian connection, but we somehow brought this village together. And you know, and I feel that is kind of really important, to remember the connections that we have to each other, because we're not really doing this thing alone.
And also, I think it raises the questions also of the responsibilities that we have to one another, right? It's that question of like, what keeps you alive is other people, and that's been underpinned in this moment by, you know, a political movements towards mutual aid, etc. But it is really a foundational principle, I think, in your work and just in Black feminist kind of.
Also, you know, why it was so important to do today, like, you know, I was reading the text of Poetry is Not a Luxury. But, you know, what the work that someone like Audre Lorde did, and, you know, the ways in which there was also that kind of, and many women, many Black feminists who continue to do this work. So that is really that work of bringing people together and, you know, being there, being in an ethics and being in a kind of care situation that, you know, will bring others up. It's like paying forward, you know, and kind of creating the space. I mean, you know, I think if people haven't seen the Berlin years, I mean, it's just such a wonderful, you know, kind of Audre arrives in Berlin and she was just like, already like, let's pull this community together, despite, you know, the thing that was going on for our own health, but knew that it was also very significant and such, you know, that's how the Afro-German when book came about, and, you know, it's that kind of sparking of energy that I think is just also incredibly powerful. And so like, I feel that when, you know, you're reading the text, she's so much uses that we, the we, she's writing for us, you know? And I think that is also something that if I can recognize that in that writing, that inspires me to continue to, you know, to do that work of creating the spaces for us.
It's also, I think, an argument against prevailing narratives of erasure, right? Like that want to convince us that, you know, our histories don't exist, or that they're somehow not important, or that they're not there, which I think is very interesting how easily those kinds of narratives get taken up, right? So that you become someone as you know, a Black feminist or as a Black organizer or a Black artist, you suddenly position yourself within a history of we have been erased by institutions, when the work is always there, when the communities have always been there, right? It's about, I think that Black feminist love ethic asks us to consider who we see recognition from.
Yeah, exactly. Who do we acknowledge the recognition from? How do we, or, you know, kind of, and I think often forget the recognition that we have and how to acknowledge those people that have helped us to kind of get where we are. And but it's the culture of the kind of individualist. And I was just thinking when you were speaking about the notion of survival, because she speaks in the text of our survival, that, you know, survival being this kind of individualistic notion, like, you know, survival of the fittest, the kind of the person that can make it through, the person who can take the top, you know, the top of the food chain, the kind of, it was funny because we were in the museum and somebody said something like that, this is the top of the food chain, and it's like, you know, who's to say that this animal, I can't remember, I think it was a lion or something, was the top of the food chain and not the ant, right? You know, and look how ants work, they work in community to kind of keep the survival of the, you know, community going. And I think that is really something that is the Black feminist love ethic is working against, really, isn't it? This idea of this kind of, you know, I need to knock you out of the way, I need to kind of, it's just a singular kind of way in which we survive, and we survive only as individuals. Well, we actually survive survive better as collective. I mean, it's interesting because we're being thrown into a bit of a, particularly here in the UK right now, into a bit of a pit of like, now it's for you to survive. You know, and that everything that kind of, when people really kind of got the beginning of the pandemic, was much more around like, yeah, we can build a community, but people fall quite quickly back into the normality of the individual. And also that normality, I suppose the other thing is, which is, you know, particularly you know, poignant here, is that if you know that you're not part of that normal, you know, that normal, as, you know, Black feminists have written so much in so many different ways. I love to sort of draw on Combahee a lot as well. That where it says, you know, if we can, you know, if you think about a Black lesbian being free, then everybody is free, right? Just think about that. It's like, if we can survive, then everybody does. But actually, the idea is to be more and more individualistic, and that's just, I don't know. From my point of view, maybe I'm an old hippie at heart. You know, I'm kind of, you know, thinking differently about that.
Sorry, I'm just going to close my window.
Are we having the sirens?
He was playing an ice cream van was going by. I wanted to ask also, maybe as people bring in their questions, about this question that I've been thinking about, which is an idea that I've kind of taken on, or an idea that an academic called Bador Lagra talks about a lot, which is like the way that we have kind of anticipatory relationships to disaster. So in this contemporary moment, right, we're being told ecological disaster is on its way. Like, the world is not going to survive in the next kind of like 12 years, etc., etc. And so I'm interested to hear what your thoughts are about this current moment, but also what we do with a kind of history of violence, how we might you know, reject this idea that disaster is to come, and instead recognize that in many ways we are and are living through and have been living through multiple disastrous moments, right? And how does that sharpen our political and artistic desires? How does it, you know, force us to have some political integrity? Does that make sense? It was quite a question.
Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, do with it what you will.
Thanks. But I would like to just say, you know, it's interesting to think about this notion of disaster and the constant notion of disaster. And, you know, and the disaster of the you know, disease, and disaster of climate change, and disaster of violence, and, you know, kind of all of this kind of stuff, when actually the idea of the world ending, you know, like, you know, there's floods in Germany, mate, there's floods in Bangladesh every year. You know, there's this notion of the end of the world that it's, for some people, it's been ending always. And there's a lot of, you know, disasters and things that are kind of happening kind of always on a daily basis. You know, there's a piece in the text that talks about the deaths that we have to, you know, they're talking about the deaths that we endure every day, you know, every day. You know, that kind of being in that proximity to death, it's kind of, you know, it's kind of terrifying, and it's kind of, I mean, I went to school around the corner from where Stephen Lawrence got killed. And in a lot of ways, there was just this moment, just knowing, like, the estate that was next to my school, where we always used to receive a threat. Often the black girls in the school would receive a threat that we should watch ourselves. You know, they would just come, and it was just like, they didn't really think about that. They would just tell us. And the amount of times I remember running down the street to, you know, try and get the bus that we could just run. So we would run totally past the estate and not be, you know, not be attacked or chased. So being around the corner from that, you know, it was kind of hardly surprising, painful, but kind of hardly surprising that happened in that area, you know, because that could have happened before. And, you know, it was a horrific murder, but obviously lots of things I knew of things that happened. And so sometimes that kind of proximity, might be that proximity, but it might also be proximity to death, which is related to health, or, you know, the fact that, you know, like when my grandmother lived, used to flood all the time in Ghana, or, you know, we were always kind of, always being in that sort of situation. So I was listening to something, and you know, it's a very difficult thing for people to kind of think about in terms of the cycle of the earth, and you know how the earth goes through cycles, you know, and actually the biggest problem to the earth is actually humanity in the first place. And what it feels like is often the solution is always to save humanity. Well, you know, the end of the world came to a whole bunch of people when they were transported across the water, you know, because their world was in Africa, you know, in West Africa, what we know now is Ghana or Benin or, you know, the Gambia or Senegal. And the end of their world was when they got on that water and transported to another world, and their end of the world was, you know, being there every day, you know, in their presence. So I mean, I don't know if I have like full answers, but I do know that you know, for some people this is only just something that they're thinking about, and perhaps also thinking about the relative safety that they have in comparison to many others. So I think the pandemic put some things out there for people to see, right? There's some things out there we can see very starkly, but whether it's going to get taken forward and sort of see starkly that perhaps some of the things that we need to do is start to thinking about what we owe each other and how it, you know, I don't know. But it's a huge answer. It's a huge question to answer. I mean, it's a huge one. It's not something that I don't think about. It's just something that I think that we can only think about. Thinking about, you know, the kind of idea of the dreaming within the poetry, in the piece. Poetry is not a luxury. You know, it's that, you know, we have some heretical ideas. That's what she said. You know, the heretical dreams. That maybe we need to start thinking about those that people think are crazy, right? Mm-hmm. You know, the fact, for example, that we can speak to our ancestors.
Exactly.
You know, that people might think that is like crazy and heretical, but maybe we need to be, because maybe there are things that we don't know or we're ignoring that we need to be kind of getting in touch with, and the way we can do that is through our body. Is that crazy? I don't know. Maybe it isn't. Because so yeah.
Also, I think helps us keep a relationship to possibility open, right? Like, I think in order to make work that is interested in liberation, but in order to do the strategic work of keeping each other alive, of resisting, you know, the systems that need to be resisted, we need to have some sense that like there is more than what we are told is possible, and we need to actually really believe in that in order to find the impetus to act, right? Or to find the impetus to make work, or to find the impetus to care for one another. And I really feel like, you know, Lord's asking us to keep that dream space open, to keep those visions that you, like you just said, seem incredibly impossible, to understand actually that they do come within the realm of possibility, that they can be actualized. Yeah. That's an important kind of effective response, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, it's like thinking, you know, I read Parable of the Sower, like literally in Norway before, you know, in January, do you know what I mean? 2020, March 2020, we were locked down, and there's this kind of whole crazy thing going on that didn't seem dissimilar to the fact that the Parable of the Sower was, you know, the whole story of that Octavia Butler created was post a pandemic, right? So we're like sort of sitting in this pandemic, but all the way through it, there's these earthseed verses, right? All this, the way through it is this kind of imagining. And then if you move into the talents, there is this imagining. And even as, you know, the main character, now I'm kind of forgetting her name, but Laura Olufemi, even as she is too old to realize or to feel that she realizes this kind of dream, she was still generating the dream. She doesn't go onto the ship to the stars, but she is still generating the dream. And I feel like sometimes when I've been privileged to hear and also be in proximity with Angela Davis many times now in my life, and I always feel like when I'm sitting with her and when I've heard her speak, you know, it's that kind of keeping that energy of a dream alive, even if the dream, whether that's the dream of abolition or the dream of liberation or whatever, even if that dream is not going to be fully fulfilled in your lifetime, it's like it is, that's how we keep it alive for those children, you know, the children that are, we don't need to have the repetition of the kind of we want to stimulate, you know. Yeah.
I think that's such an excellent place to end this kind of portion of our conversation. Thank you so much, Barbie. We're going to move to questions, and there are a lot of them. So the first question is, how does sound and music alter or transform language for Barbie?
Ooh, how does sound or music? Well, sound transform language. Well, I think the sound and music are languages. I think that they're languages as well. I think we're just limited to this notion of the idea that we only have these kind of, the language that creates words, that creates understanding, or creates a particular kind of knowledge or a particular kind of knowledge understanding. And I think I've sort of moved more and more to sound and distorting sound and layers of sound and creating sound works and creating multi-vocal works and thinking about that, to think about sound as it kind of really resonates all the way through the body, you know, so it can awaken different ways of knowing and recognizing and invoking kind of experiences and emotion. And again, you know, that kind of connects to emotion. We think that emotion is just like really quite straightforward and often actually block loads of emotions. But the idea of ones that we probably don't even have words for, because particularly now, I mean, like there's probably been emotions that people just don't have words for or understand. You know, it's just like, I'm just really interested in that kind of invocation, that possibility, that portal that you can go through in terms of sound. I mean, I'm a real big music fan anyway, and I know that, you know, from my various different experiences of being in kind of different musical sites or in different musical experiences, you know, from the rave and the bass and the ways that it kind of resonates through your body to you know, kind of listening to something that kind of pulls in a lot of silences. It brings different kinds of emotion and emotiveness and ways of knowing. And so for me, I think I'm working with that for that purpose as well. And I've never done a performance like this, where I've worked with musicians, and, you know, I've never done it, but it's something that I've always kind of thought would be really exciting. And so this opportunity, and then to work with, like, you know, Hannah and the theremin, and Femi worked on the sound piece as well, to kind of work with people who also have a way of thinking about sound in a kind of very expansive way, was really important to me to bring this work to piece, you know, to fruition. Whether it was the sound piece that's in the gallery or whether it's this kind of live piece. And yeah, it was just super exciting.
The next question is, has Barbie thought about how her performances relate to or depart from other feminist forms of togetherness, like consciousness raising or critical consciousness or protest?
Can you read it again, please?
has Barbie thought about how her performances relate to or depart from other feminist forms of togetherness, like critical consciousness raising, or protest? So I think it's basically asking, how is your work similar to or different to consciousness raising groups, for example, or a protest, which is a form of political togetherness, right?
Mm. Mm.
If my interpretation was poor.
I suppose it's all in there, and I'm just thinking about prayer, the Max Roach album, prayer, prayer, protest, oh gosh, this is where I need someone like Gail or Rabs to help me to remember, but that, when you think about, or if you think about particularly like, I'm thinking about carnival, how carnival, I mentioned the Caravana before, how carnival is protest. It is, if you really want to get into carnival, it is also, it's a way of knowing. I don't know whether I would necessarily use the word consciousness raising, but it's a way of kind of being in a kind of dialogue with the histories, but it's also, this kind of evocation of pleasure through the body, and I think all of those things do exist within those practices. Within the protest practice, there is a being on the street with others to raise your voice against something that you're completely passionate about is as evoking of a form of ecstasy as creating music, and I think for particularly when you think about Black music, there's kind of there's a very blurry line, even if it's like even if it's a kind of love song, there's a very blurry line between politics and pleasure, and and also kind of dreaming, or what I would say, if you're thinking about consciousness, really, maybe the dreaming or the kind of accesses to different kinds of knowledge. I hope that kind of answers the person's question.
The next question is, can you say more about the relationship between this performance and the particular setting of the Kettle's Yard house?
Wow, I'm taking glasses off for this one. I am sitting in the Kettle's Yard house right now, and I'm, and I came up through, and I'm looking around, and I'm looking at the artworks that are around me, and like many other people. I mean, I came up through art college, many other artists, so I kind of know a lot. I can kind of go around and say, hey, there's a Brancusi, and hey, this is a so and so, and and this is a Bridget Riley, and this is this, and so I kind of, there's that kind of knowing of all of this work. And one, I'm interested in the domestic spaces and the disruption of domestic space, but also I think there is this thing of like when I started practicing, I've heard people, in fact, including a very very famous, once Turner Prize nominated but not won artist, say, I didn't know there was any Black artists, when she was in a lineup with, for the Turner Prize with a very famous Black artist who won, right? But also the relationship to some of the sculptures, for example, downstairs, that that really draw on kind of African sculpture and things like that, and this idea of, I suppose, what is collected, what is what is not collected, what is deemed as valuable, how you live with artworks, and I think the other thing is that this is a really lived in space, so the artworks were lived with, so there are some resonances in that respect as well, that I'm also thinking about living with, kind of sort of my artistic practice, but also I think there's also a kind of jarring with the kind of art histories that kind of create knowledge in a particular way. So I mean, and that's just and that's an experimentation. And also, I think it was a very interesting space for us to do something that was so based in a ritual and a ritual that was in relation to us and to our kind of ways of thinking about knowledge and poetry and creating, you know, artwork, the Black feminist way of thinking about that, within a context like this.
Thank you. The last question is, can you tell us more about the new work that you mentioned you were filming recently? What other projects are you working on?
Wow. The new work that I was filming in Glasgow last week. Wow. That work is an ongoing work that I've been working on, which is kind of excavating a kind of imagined archive around the first Miss Ghana, who was crowned, who was called Monica Amia Koffia, who was crowned in 1957, a few days before the independence of Ghana. And so I am sort of reimagining. Her prize was to come to the UK. And they're like little traces of her visit to the UK, like a Pathé newsreel kind of thing. It says Miss Ghana comes to London, and it's a, you know, they take her to Aspreys and, you know, show her diamonds and show her the Buckingham Palace and stuff. And then there's Bourneville. She visited Bourneville, and there's like a chocolate and there's cake made of her. And so I'm imagining her kind of, her kind of different visits, like imagining her going to different places. And this one happened to be Glasgow. And I also kind of have been like sort of juxtaposing that with the writing of Ama Ata Aidoo, particularly her book, Our Sister Killjoy, or the, which is otherwise known as, I think, And the Black-Eyed Squint. And it's this kind of a way of looking at our kind of relationships. I sort of embody her and looking about our relationships to place, as sort of, you know, people who belong but don't belong here, and our relationship to those to institutional spaces, to cities, to places that believe that they don't have a connected history to coloniality. And so I've been working on that. So it's kind of different. I am still working with people. I'm working with people to kind of, you know, to create the stories, to create the imaginings. But it is very much a film project. And and I have made 2 films before, which were showed in Get Up, Stand Up Now. One was showed in Get Up, Stand Up Now, and 2 were showed in a show called Starless Midnight in the Baltic in 2017. But yeah, they were a kind of departure, but a very interesting departure for me, because I'm still working with people, still working with stories, still kind of thinking about how we work with memory, how memories live in the very fabric of their spaces that are around us in the UK. Yeah, that's what I'm working on at the moment. And my PhD. Oh, Lola.
Thank you. It's only left to me to say thank you so much for sharing your work with us, but also sharing your thoughts with us. Thank you to Kettle's Yard for giving us this space to have this conversation. And please do get down to see the exhibition if you have a free moment. But yeah, thank you so much, Barby.
Thank you so much. It's on till October, so I mean, I think there's a bit of time.
Have time.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Bye. Bye.